Hello, all, and welcome to TEDx Gateway's webinar series, The World Has Changed. Before we begin the session, here are some house rules. For attendees on Zoom, please type your questions into the Q&A panel in your screen below. This session is also streaming live on TEDx Gateway's Facebook page, and that can be found at www.facebook.com/TEDxGateway/live. And we'll be taking questions from the comments section there as well. I'm Doc M. I'm your champion of well-being. I'm the founder of The Human Edge, and it's my great pleasure to be with you all here again. Today, we've got an incredibly special guest. I'm such a big fanboy. I was really looking forward to this session for many weeks. We have the incredible Dave Asprey. Needs no introduction, but I'll just say a few words for those of you who are signing in and watching us live. Dave Asprey is the founder and chairman of Bulletproof 360, a high-performance coffee and food company. And he's the creator of the wildly popular Bulletproof coffee. He's a four-time New York Times best-selling author. He's the host of the Webby award-winning podcast, Bulletproof Radio, and has been featured on the Today Show, Fox News, Nightlife, CNN, and many, many more platforms. Over the last 2 decades, Dave, the father of biohacking, has worked with world-renowned doctors, researchers, scientists, and global mavericks to uncover the latest, most innovative methods, techniques, and products for enhancing our mental and physical performance. You can see why I'm so excited to have him here today. David, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share what's my great passion. People have said, Dave, what is biohacking? And it's a word that I termed, or it's a word that I coined because I wanted something that would bring together the decades of anti-aging research that are out there. When I was young, I weighed 300 pounds. I weigh about 200 pounds now. The New York Times says I'm almost muscular, which is what you want to be when you're going to live to at least 180, which is my goal and something that I'm very, very serious about. I started learning from people 3 times my age, but I was the only young person interested in anti-aging because, frankly, I was so sick. I'm in Silicon Valley, and I've had an incredible career, but my brain isn't working. I have arthritis that I've had since I was a teenager. I was pre-diabetic. I had blood tests showing high risk of stroke and heart attack. So I started out with the diseases of aging before I was 30. That was not the situation that anyone wants to be in. And after 18 months of working out an hour and a half a day, 6 days a week on a low-fat, low-calorie diet, I looked down and I still weighed 300 pounds. And I still had all the health problems, but I was more tired. And I said to myself, I must be eating too much lettuce because there's not much else in my diet. And I realized, looking at my friends eating French fries who didn't exercise and weighed half as much as I did, that maybe what I was doing just didn't work. And then I got really angry. And I said, this isn't okay. I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm a computer hacker. I can hack the internet. I'm helping to build the internet. Why is it that I can't just feel good? And I decided that I would measure what I was trying to improve and that I would do everything at once that could change the outcome instead of testing one variable at a time. I realized that I'd made the assumption that, there must be one thing, but that was an untested assumption. It turns out we are systems, and to change a system, sometimes you need to do more than one thing. It's the same with anti-aging. We know now there are 7 pillars of aging, different systems you have to maintain. If you have a car and you only change the windshield wiper fluid or you only change the tires, you're not going to expect the car to work for a long time. There's a maintenance schedule that has all sorts of things you have to do. It turns out the human body is the same way. So how do I get these incredible wizards of anti-aging who have been studying it for decades to talk with the neuroscientists, to talk with astronauts, to talk with bodybuilders, to talk with professional athletes, so we can have a dialogue about something that unites all humans? And I put it into the definition of biohacking as I was building the movement and building the whole idea of this. And the definition I came up with was biohacking is the art and the science of changing the environment around you and inside of you so that you have full control of your own biology. And what that means is that if you want to be swole, you want to be, a bodybuilder, that's your definition of control. Maybe you want to be incredibly fertile so you can have kids and you're having a hard time with that. Maybe you want tons of energy to be a parent and grow a company. Maybe you want to be the world's smartest person. It's all about biological control. What's most important here is to understand that your body is constantly looking at and listening to the environment around you. And for the first time in human history, we have incredible fine-grained control of the environment around us. We can choose the lighting. We can choose the temperature. We can choose exactly what foods we eat. We can choose when we eat them. You go back a couple hundred years, you were lucky to have food and you would eat what was there. And you had a fireplace and you had sunshine and that was it. So we can do what we want now, but with all of that capability, a lot of the times we haven't thought about how do we tune our environment to make us live a long time? How do we tune what's happening inside the body so that we're full of energy, so our brains work all the time? And I made that my mission mostly because I didn't want to feel the way I felt in my 20s ever again. And right now, it doesn't look like I ever will. Examples of what can happen with biohacking. I measured my brain's response time. It's something called P300D, and you hook electrodes up to your brain, and it's how quickly do your eyes and your ears allow the brain to accept a signal and do something with it. So this isn't about measuring intelligence. It's measuring the youthfulness of your brain. I have the average brain response time of a 20-year-old, and I'm 48. Now, how did I do that? Well, that's what biohacking is about. I measure my arterial flexibility, which is something that determines whether you're going to get cardiovascular disease. And keep in mind, I had the signs of cardiovascular disease 20 years ago, yet I have the average arterial flexibility of a 24-year-old. So you can do these anti-aging things. It's entirely possible. But along the way, how do you be able to pay attention all day long? How do you know that every day you have more than enough energy to handle whatever life brings your way? Whether it's some sort of an infection that you didn't think you were going to get, that you get, or maybe it was just a really busy, high intensity day where you're on camera for 12 hours straight talking and you're still full of energy at the end of the day. These things are possible. In fact, they're not just possible, they're our birthright. That's how it's supposed to be. And I've spent more than $1 million on myself doing this in the name of biohacking. And I've become probably the world's first professional biohacker, where I go out and I try all of these things. And what I've learned and what I've written in my books is that you can go out and you can do what the crazy billionaires are doing. And I've done my best to go out and do incredibly intense stem cell procedures. And I've traveled the world doing these things to understand the mechanisms and to see the future. Because what costs $100,000 now as a biological intervention is going to cost $10,000 10 years from now, and $1,000 15 years from now, and $100 after that. So the future is coming very quickly. And if that sounds like a crazy claim, I want you to think about cell phones 30 years ago. 30 years ago, very few people had a cell phone. And when they did, or maybe 40 years ago now, it was $20, $30 a minute in order to use a cell phone. And only very wealthy people had them in the trunks of their car. And today, we all know you can have an incredibly powerful cell phone that is not very expensive, and you can have it in the poorest parts of the world, which is phenomenal. And it's been world changing. And that happened in our lifetime. And I want you to think about 100 years ago. So right now it's 2021. What was the world like in 1921? Well, we didn't have antibiotics. We couldn't spell DNA because we hadn't discovered it yet. We didn't know there was such a thing as a mitochondria, which are these incredibly important parts of our cells that read the environment and produce energy and hormones and other things inside the body. So if we don't know they exist, how do you hack them? Well, you can't. We're at a time in the world where there's more knowledge about biology, about the environment, about the human body, about our brain than there ever has been in all of history. And we also can share that knowledge in a way that is incredible. In my life, when I was a freshman in college, the library still had microfiche. Some people listening know what those are. Little plastic transparent things, and you want to do research. It would take 10 years for me to write one of the books I can write in a year now because of the technology that we built just in the time that we have today. So in the world of biohacking, all of us now have the ability to get more knowledge about the state of our body, the state of our minds, the state of the world around us, and to do something about it very quickly and very affordably. And what I want to walk through today for you are some of the things that you're allowed to do that you couldn't do because we just didn't know it, except in some parts of the world. Every one of these incredibly expensive biohacks is using a pathway that you can activate by changing things in the world around you, quite often for free. Let's walk through the world of biohacking and the variables that you get to play with to make your body do what you want. One of the simplest ones is temperature. You say, what? Temperature? What do you mean? Well, it turns out that these ancient mitochondria that are inside your body, they're bacteria that we incorporated into our cells, we like to think about 2 billion years ago. These bacteria are incredibly sensitive to everything they pick up, and they decide, is this body at risk? Is it scary? If so, let's make energy and hormones of fear and make sure you don't get eaten by a tiger. And if they get a signal from you, from the world around you, that it's time to go in and clean things up, they'll do that as well. And if you imagine the days in, say, a place like Las Vegas, before we had LED lighting, there were teams of people who would drive around and they'd look for the dim bulbs or the bulbs that were burned out. And we're talking millions of light bulbs. And then they'd get up there and they'd unscrew the bulbs and they'd put in bulbs that were bright enough. You do the same thing in your body every single day. And surprisingly, if you were to, at the end of your shower, turn the water to cold and let it hit you right here where you have the most temperature sensors and right here where you have the second most temperature sensors, your body gets a signal that says, there could be an ice age at any time. Any one of these little light bulbs in the body that cannot make heat really quickly must be defective. Let me replace those weak things with young, strong things. Now, how much does a cold shower cost? It's free. You do it for 1 minute at the end of your shower. If you're doing this, if you're listening to this going, wait a minute, why would I ever do that? It's because you'll feel terrible when you do this for the first 3 days. And after 3 days, the body gets a signal that says, sometimes I need to do this. Now it's part of my requirement for being able to survive in the world. And it'll replace those things and it'll change the level of something called cardiolipin in the mitochondrial membrane. Do you need to know that? No. What you need to know is if I take on this simple free practice, it's going to give me a better metabolism. And a better metabolism gives you more energy now. And it makes you live longer and it makes you less susceptible to all sorts of diseases. So if temperature is one of those things, we can go cold or we can go hot. And it turns out things like a sauna, which have been used around different parts of the world for centuries, well, they raise something called heat shock protein that's very similar to something that happens during exercise. And studies show if you were to, for brief periods, expose yourself to a lot of heat, the body also gets stronger. And what we're realizing now is that when you briefly expose the body to something intense, whether it's exercise, whether it's heat, whether it's cold, and some other things we'll talk about, the body responds by saying, oh, I'm going to get stronger. And it's a powerful thing to do because what I did when I was young and overweight, I didn't understand that. So I'd go to the gym for 90 minutes a day. It turns out I would have got a lot more results if I went to the gym for 15 minutes every other day and I did the right exercises in the right order. We just didn't have the data. And funny enough, a lot of the data that we're finding today matches very ancient practices. So when you look at the world's first biohackers, they didn't have all the electrodes and sensors, things that we have today. So what we would do around the world is we take a small percentage of the population and we'd say, you, go sit in a cave and fast for a while. You, go to a monastery and practice, do breathing exercises and figure out what works, write it down and hand it to the next generation. And in only 500 or so years, we're going to know a lot about the human condition. And I am constantly amazed at how much of the biohacking world comes from old practices, and we're now validating them. One of my favorite ones that I'm well known for is bulletproof coffee. That was inspired by a trip in 2004 to Mount Kailash, where I'm walking a core around Mount Kailash. And I had yak butter tea that made my brain work in a way that made no sense. Now, what is yak butter tea? Well, it's yak butter blended into green tea. And there's no reason that I knew of that it would make my brain work better, but it did. Well, how did the Tibetans know that this was something that worked? Well, they'd noticed over time. A sane person like me would say, I'm going to eat a stick of butter and I'm going to drink a cup of coffee and it's going to work. But it turns out it doesn't work. If you put that butter in a cup of coffee and you blend it, something magic happens. We didn't know what it was. I funded some research at the University of Washington, and they figured out one of the many reasons that this combination works. And it's because when your body receives water, when you drink a glass of water, the first thing you do is you expose the water to little tiny droplets of fat that make up the outer layer of your cells. And then your body heats it up. And that process of heating it up with those droplets of oil that make up the cells in you changes the water so that your body can use that water to make energy. Well, when you blend that fat into coffee or tea, what you end up doing is changing the structure of the water so that your body can more quickly use it to make energy. And it's one of the reasons that you feel different when you blend it versus you don't. So we didn't have science to explain why, but we had tradition to explain why. And what I've found of anything is that going back and validating ancient practices, you have a much higher chance of finding something that works than just randomly testing stuff, which is a very Western approach. Throughout my career, I've seen it over and over. Take acupuncture. There's no reason that should work is a very American perspective on that. And we'll also say, therefore, it doesn't work, ignoring all the data that it does. Well, it turns out now we have better sensors and there are electrical pathways where the needles go. We're too arrogant to understand that. So we're validating ancient practices, and many of them out of Ayurveda, which is fascinating to me. The other variables aside from temperature that work very well is ketosis. And the keto diet is something that has existed since at least the early 1970s, but we didn't understand all the ways to use it. And ketosis is when your body starts burning fat instead of burning carbohydrates as a primary fuel source. When you do that, it turns off inflammation throughout the body. And now we know that the neurons in your brain, they prefer energy from fat to energy from sugar. But the immune system maintenance part of your brain prefers energy from carbohydrates. So we can say, how do I get some of this precious stuff in my brain that makes my neurons work better and is anti-aging and is anti-inflammatory, but how do I keep my system running? Well, there's an ancient way of doing this that works very well, and it's called fasting. And the world of fasting has changed a lot since I first started writing about this about a decade ago. There is abundant evidence that says that if you were to go without anything in your stomach except for tea or coffee or water, basically no sugar, no protein, for at least 12 and maybe even 16 hours or more per day, that your chances of dying from all diseases go down dramatically. Most people won't consider this. They say, well, I would be hungry. I would starve. The reality is that it takes you about 90 days to starve. If you skip breakfast, you won't starve, but it feels like you're going to starve. So what you can do is you can say, all right, I don't want to spend money on biohacking, but I want to choose practices that give me more energy today and give me more years of my life and higher quality of those years of my life. And one of the other big ones, the subject of my most recent book called Fast This Way, is exactly that. It's learning how to skip breakfast, and it's knowing when to eat. Now you say, why do these matter for biohacking? Why would timing matter? Isn't a calorie a calorie? Well, no, a calorie is not a calorie, because if you eat a calorie at midnight, it does something different to your system than when you eat a calorie in the morning or at noon. And we didn't understand this 20 years ago. In fact, the Nobel Prize over the last 10 years, several of them have been granted for understanding what's called circadian biology, which is, the body has a timing system and we're supposed to eat when the sun is right above us and we're not supposed to eat when it's dark outside. And food timing and food composition, so you can have more of the right kinds of fat, really makes a difference. Now, I'd like to say that I discovered all this stuff, except if you go back to Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine or even South American practices, they figured this out a long time ago. Fasting has been a part of every spiritual tradition there is, because they figured out around the world, when you don't eat for a couple days, your body goes into ketosis, and ketosis allows you to reach new states of awareness in the mind because of what it does for these neurons. Now, I am a lazy biohacker, and that I don't want to spend more energy and more time than I need to get into these states. So you can add things to your diet that turn ketones on. The primary one is something called MCT oil, which is the other ingredient in Bulletproof Coffee. I knew about it because of my anti-aging nonprofit work very, very early on, and I've made MCT oil a global phenomenon. It's because you get the benefits of fasting, or at least some of them, if you add that to your diet. MCT oil is a extract of coconut oil. It's a relatively simple thing. You can buy it around the world now, and it's a flavorless oil. And you take a little bit of that, and your body has the keto energy as if you're fasting. So if we look at food timing, that's one of the variables. We looked at temperature. And what about light? These are things that you can manipulate for almost free. When we were single-celled organisms in the ocean, or at least life was single-celled organisms in the ocean, we were stuck to the cycle of the sun. In every life form, whether you're a tree, whether you're a frog, whether you're a human, it doesn't matter. We all follow circadian rhythms. There's a daily rhythm to this that is controlled by light as the most important signal. You wouldn't know it, but about 5% of the cells in your eyes that receive light do not go into stuff you see. They go around your visual processing right into something called the SCN. This is the central timing circuit for your body. And if you sit under bright lights, look at a bright screen at 11 o'clock at night, the central timing system for your body says, it must be daytime. Let me turn on energy instead of turn on recovery. If you were instead to dim your lights at night, or you were to put on the various kinds of glasses, and one of my companies makes these, but the various kinds of glasses that take out the color of light that tells you that it's daytime, you can still watch TV, you can still use your computer, but you go to sleep and you sleep like you're supposed to. We can now track our sleep. This is an Oura ring, and I've been tracking my sleep every night for the last 15 years using a variety of technologies. I was CTO of one of the companies that used to do that from the wrist. And the quality of your life changes dramatically when you learn how to get a really good night's sleep in maybe less time than it takes you today. So now we've talked about light. We've talked about when and what we eat. We've talked about temperature. Those are 3 environmental variables. And I haven't talked about spending anything at all unless you wanted to get some data to track it. So biohacking, it turns out, is just about best practices that allow you to do what you want to do, to have the energy that you want to have. And that's a really important perspective. Biohacking is just making better choices with things you're going to do every day. Maybe you do what I just talked about, and you read Fast This Way or any good book on intermittent fasting, and you say, you know what? I spend a certain amount of time and energy and money on making breakfast. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'm going to have more energy when I do that. And you say, okay, I haven't spent much on biohacking, but now I have more energy and more focus, and maybe I'm not getting diabetes. Maybe my pants fit better. That's certainly what happens with me. And people lost 1 million+ pounds using this kind of advice over the past few years. We have other things we can do, like vibration and sound. There are companies out there making devices where you listen to certain sounds that change the state of your brain. And you could say, wow, this is new tech, except it's not. We've known this forever. Chanting, the bells, you ring one bell in this ear, one bell in this ear, it sets up a standing wave in the brain, and you can change the state of your awareness from doing that. We also have things like movement and exercise. Most people on the planet do not exercise as much as their governments say. And there's a reason for that, because exercise that isn't very effective makes you tired and hungry and doesn't produce very many results. The data says very clearly, you need to move for 20 minutes a day, go for a walk. And once or twice a week, you need to do something really hard for about 10 minutes. So the body knows you need to be ready to do that. And when I say something really hard, it's picking up heavy things or running really, really fast. And if you do that, magically, you don't have to spend 10 hours a week exercising. You get most of that time back, but you get other results from your body. And you can do incredible things with technology on top of that. You can run electricity over your muscles. You can restrict blood flow. There's all sorts of things that we've discovered in the world of biohacking, the stuff that I write about daily. You don't have to do that to say, I am going to change the environment around me and inside of me so that I have full control of my own biology. And when you do this, the amount of energy that is available for you to show up in your life, especially to receive the emotions that your body has and then to choose how to act instead of being reactive, it goes up dramatically and it makes a very big difference. So what you end up with as a person who's interested in having more energy and looking and feeling the way you want to feel, you end up saying, I've got enough left over at the end of the day that I'm not going to be hangry instead of hungry, that I'm going to be able to pay attention. I'm going to be able to show up as a parent, even if my kids are misbehaving, and I'm going to be kind to others. And there is a reason in biohacking that this matters. It's because we follow an algorithm of life, and all life forms, including humans, will put all of our energy into something scary. And fear is the first of the F words that I wrote about in my most recent book. So if something is scary, whether it's criticism, whether it's something that's actually scary, all biology stops recovery and starts getting ready to protect you. And that gets 10 times more focused than it probably needs. We also spend about 5 times more energy than necessary thinking about what's for lunch. The average person, 15% of your thoughts every day are about what are you going to eat. You can turn that off with intermittent fasting. And the third thing is we are biologically wired to have love in our lives. And we spend way more energy thinking about that than is necessary because there is no concern over the human species continuing, but your cells don't know that. The reason I'm walking you through those is the fourth F word is something all life is wired to do, and it's friend. So we have fear, feed, fertility, and friend in order. We are wired to take care of our elders, to take care of children, even if they're not ours, and to be members of society who help other people. And the reason biohacking is so important is that it frees up enough energy that we can have our elders who have the energy of young people, but the wisdom of ages. We can have people who act with kindness and integrity, even if they're stressed, because it's all about the energy. And I'd like to leave you with the final free and most important biohack of all. And it's gratitude. Because if you have a daily practice of telling someone what you're grateful for before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, or writing it down in a journal, that action will turn off the fight or flight response. It tells those ancient cells in your cells, tells those ancient bacteria that are a part of your cells. It tells them, you know what? The world is safe. You can go out of fight or flight mode and you can go into rest and recover mode. It is a very simple thing, and it is a part of most spiritual traditions around the world. So I'd like you to understand a lot of science now is validating what we've known we're supposed to be doing, and we just haven't done because there's so much advice that is poor advice out there. I would like you to do what works. And the ultimate reason all of this works is actually best captured up in a Henry Miller quote. And he says, the goal of life is not to accumulate power, but to radiate it. Because the more power your body makes in your cells, the more electricity, the more energy, the more you have, but it's not something you can store. You can store exactly 6 seconds of energy in your body, and you have to make more after that. When you have more than enough energy, you are wired to go out and make the world a better place. And that's why biohacking is important. And thank you for listening to this talk.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'd like to thank you on a personal level, actually, just for inspiring me and all the folks who are signed in to watch this. Even for me, been in this space for 20 years, but you've really created this as a movement and opened it up for all of us to engage in and build it into our daily practices. So Thank you for that. You spoke a lot about the different biohacks, and I actually picked up a pair of these glasses, which I'm going to wear when I ask you this question, because you already spoke about light. A lot of the things you spoke about were some of the easier aspects, but I've heard you talk recently around the stem cell transplantation procedure that you went through, which is perhaps not for the faint-hearted, but certainly the doctor in me is very, very interested by that. Please share what you did for that and the reasons for doing so.
Absolutely. I went to Docere medical clinics in Utah, and I had about a liter of my bone marrow, or about a half a liter of my bone marrow taken out, and they spun it to pull the stem cells out. They pulled fat out of my body and took the stem cells out of that. So these are my own stem cells. Then for over about a 4-hour period, 3 doctors reintroduced those stem cells into every joint in my body, into the inside of my spinal cord, into my cerebral spinal fluid, so the stem cells would get into my brain, as well as face, hair, reproductive organs, and pretty much anywhere a stem cell can go. It's probably the most extensive stem cell procedure you can do at one time. It's called the 6 hands whole body stem cell makeover. And I helped to pioneer the creation of that. And the idea is, if you're going to do something like stem cells, it's a big procedure. You might as well do everything you can do all at once. The impact of doing things like that is really profound, because one of the 7 pillars of aging that I've written about in my anti-aging book is stem cell exhaustion. As we age our stem cells, we run out of them and they aren't as effective. So now I have those stem cells in joints and in places where I would have run out. And I'm planning to do a procedure like that probably every 5 or so years for the rest of my life. And that could be a very long time, because I want the stem cells of younger people. Since I started doing that, we've already had incredible innovation in the world of stem cells. We can now take stem cells from your skin and turn them into what's called pluripotent stem cells, which means they can turn into anything that you need them to turn into in your body. And right now, it's expensive. Over time, it will become more and more available. In fact, the biggest thing holding it back is regulatory problems around the world. The current state of most governments is we don't understand it, therefore you can't do it. But the biohackers of the world are saying we have a fundamental human right to own our own biology, and that is not something owned by governments. So we will go anywhere in the world necessary to do it. And the places in the world where you have more medical freedom, places like Med City in India, places like Singapore and Thailand, are seeing an influx, at least they were before the pandemic, of people traveling to go get the most potent and affordable anti-aging technologies. So I plan to keep doing that, and no one's going to stop me.
Fantastic. In your most recent book, Fast This Way, which you spoke about, all about the aspects of not only what you eat, but how, when, and why you eat certain foods. A lot of folks joining in would be very interested with this idea of fuel compartmentalization or metabolic flexibility, and the sort of idea around the preferential fat burning which exists in these ketogenic states. Can you help us understand how this works, particularly in health and performance, and why it's so important for us to do so?
The body can run off of almost anything, and we evolved this way so that we can survive. We can burn only protein. It's just metabolically really bad for you to be on a high protein diet because, eventually there is a way to starve from not getting enough fat or enough carbohydrate. When we teach the body that sometimes you have to run off your own energy stores, sometimes, and most of the time, you have to be able to burn fat from the food you eat. You have to feed it the right fat. It'll do that. And one of the most perfect fats you could get is ghee, clarified butter. And people from India know exactly what I'm talking about. This has been used traditionally. If you were to do exactly the same thing with corn oil or soybean oil or canola oil, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because they're different types of fat that do different things in the body. So when you're eating enough saturated fat, yes, eating saturated fat, 45% of your cell membranes are made out of saturated fat. It is not bad for you. What is bad for you is damaged seed oils that humans have never eaten throughout most of history. And when you do that, then the body says, I need to have metabolic pathways turned on to burn fat. And when you sometimes also eat carbohydrates, you have rice, you have lentils if they're compatible with your biology, and not everyone handles lentils well, you end up saying, my body knows sometimes I have to eat carbohydrates, sometimes I have to eat fat, and I get adequate protein. And when you're in that state, you now have metabolic flexibility and you feel a lot better. But if instead you eat mostly bad fats, these omega-6 seed oils, and you eat mostly carbohydrates and tons of sugar, which is what most people do, the body says, why would I need strong cells? You're always feeding me liquid sugar and you're giving me tons of carbohydrates. Why would I ever need to burn fat? And then you're on a path to diabetes, which is caused by eating bad fats and by eating too many carbohydrates and by eating too often. And if you took just one thing away from this entire talk, if you just don't eat when it's dark outside, that one thing is going to meaningfully lower your risk of diabetes. And as we all know, diabetes is rampant worldwide. It's a big problem in India. It's a big problem in the US. It's caused by bad fats instead of good fats. And it's caused by eating after dark and eating too much sugar. So we can fix that very easily.
Fantastic. That practicality is very helpful. Lots of questions coming in. I encourage people to keep them flowing. I'm going to take them in a few minutes' time. You speak about living to 180. Your last book, Superhuman, is all about longevity. I had the great pleasure of having Dr. Dean Ornish on the show a few weeks ago, and he and I were talking about my personal ambition of living to 120, but you've obviously upped that since then. Lots of people ask why. Why would I want to live to 180? A little existential. Help us understand why you want to do that.
Well, when you think about aging, you probably think about wheelchairs and diapers and tubes and monitors and not knowing your own name. And it's a scary thing. But that's not what aging has been like throughout most of history. If you didn't die of an infection or a war injury or starvation, and you lived into your old age, you were the village elder. You were someone who had the wisdom of living that long, and you had the energy to be an active member of your community and to share the knowledge with the next generation and the one after that. What we have now is an epidemic of loss of our village elders. And it is the role of people who have accumulated wisdom to share it. But if we're all too tired and too distracted and too sick and we have Alzheimer's, we can't remember it, it's not going to work. And some of the problems we have in the world today are because of this problem of both losing respect for our elders and our elders not being well enough to do their job. Most of the learning that I've had, the most powerful guests I've had on my podcasts are oftentimes in their 90s, in their 80s, because they've figured out stuff that you will not see until you've had nearly 100 years of time on this earth. So we need to bring that back. What if you looked and felt like you do today, 100 years from today? Would you want to live? Most people say yes. The reason that we think we want to die is because we think we're going to suffer greatly and not know our own name when we're old. That is not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work. And with the technology we have now, it is entirely likely that when I am 180, I will be moving around under my own power. My brain will work at least as well as it does today, if not better. And I will look and feel really good. So my goal is at least 180. And my real goal is to die at a time and by a method of my choice. It's okay to be done when you're here. But until I'm done, until there's nothing left to be curious about, there's nothing left to play with, there's nothing left that's an act of service for other people, I'm happy to stick around.
That's beautiful. I'm so happy when you spoke about the 7 pillars of aging. You mentioned mitochondria. It's something very near and dear to my heart because in my latest book as well, there's a whole chapter dedicated to mitochondria. And in medicine, even 20, 30 years ago, when I was in med school, we only looked at mitochondria from a disease perspective, right? A few obscure little diseases that would affect people. Now, the work that's being done is showcasing just how central, how mainstream this is for performance, but also just our well-being as well. Help us connect the dots beyond just the intermittent fasting and the ketogenic aspects that you spoke about. Where does the role play in the wider spectrum of health?
Well, a substantial portion of the decision-making in your body is made by these ancient bacteria that are now a part of our cells. They are the frontline environmental sensors. So they will pick up what's happening in the world around you. And then they make a decision in each cell, inside each cell, that says, okay, how much energy should I make? How many hormones should I make? Should I make inflammation? And from there, that signal rolls up. Eventually it makes it into your nervous system. And then eventually it makes it into your brain. And then your brain says, oh, I've got 7 layers of my prefrontal cortex. Let me just throw away all this information. And we get to be aware of the little tiny tip of that iceberg that started in quadrillions of ancient cells in our body. And it's phenomenal to think about that. We used to believe that cancer was genetic, and it looks like about 3 to 5% of cancer is genetic. The rest of it is caused by mitochondrial dysfunction. Diabetes, mitochondrial dysfunction. Alzheimer's disease, mitochondrial dysfunction. What is mitochondrial dysfunction? It just means that the cells do a bad job of turning air and food into energy. Your primary task every day is 30 pounds of air and some amount of fuel, whether you eat it or you get it from your fat stores. You combine those, you make exactly the same electricity that powers your phone. And if you have more electricity, then the body says, oh, great, you have more power to think and you have more power to heal and recover. And if you make less electricity, then you have less power to recover and less power to think, and you're more likely to yell at your kids or yell at your boss. And that's just the human condition. The interesting thing, though, is that 48% of people under age 40 have early onset mitochondrial dysfunction. We do a bad job of turning air and food into electricity. I was one of those. And everyone over age 40 does a poor job of that. And we used to call that aging. And now I would call that the beginning of a disease process. If you get diabetes, which is an early sign of this stuff, your risk of the other big 4 killers that are likely to kill most people listening to this today, it is diabetes, which is a precursor to cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. So if those cells are making energy well instead of inflammation, your chances of dying from anything unpleasant go way up, including an infection, including a car accident, including anything. And if those cells work really well, magically, your chances of dying of anything go down. You're basically hard to kill when your mitochondria work well.
Fantastic. The real enthusiasts would have also heard of something called mTOR, molecular target of rapamycin, part of the whole mitochondrial complex as well, signaling pathways. And we've seen that manipulating mTOR has been beneficial in yeast, in flies, in mice, in primates, hopefully human beings one day soon. Would you be able to share some understanding for people who are not familiar with mTOR, what that exactly does, and particularly connecting it back to your ketogenic diets as well?
What a beautiful question. The mTOR molecule you can look at as a signaling molecule in the body that tells the body to go into grow mode. And you can say, that's great. I wanted to be able to grow. I wanted muscle. I wanted youth. But mTOR also, because constant growth, there's a name for that, it's called cancer. mTOR is something that contributes to inflammation and it contributes to youthfulness. And in my books, I talk about how to manipulate this incredibly important signaling molecule. It turns out that mTOR is like a spring. You can compress the spring with certain activities. You turn it down. And when mTOR is low, the body will go into repair mode. And when mTOR is high, the body goes into grow mode. So what you want to do is keep mTOR low so you don't get cancer, and then spike it so that you have muscles, and then drop it and then spike it. There are 3 things that compress it like a spring. The more you compress it, the more it grows when you want it to grow. The first thing that we know compresses mTOR is fasting or intermittent fasting. In other words, that skip breakfast, that's great. You suppressed mTOR. We know also that not eating protein, if you have a day with no protein whatsoever, your mTOR will stay low. And I talk about that in Fast This Way. It's called protein fasting. So you can still eat, you just don't eat protein. And we also know that exercise suppresses mTOR, and we know that coffee suppresses mTOR. So if you wanted the most results in the least period of time, you would don't eat after dinner, skip breakfast. Now you're intermittent fasting, you've compressed mTOR. Then before you eat, you would exercise. Even for 10 minutes of doing push-ups and squats is just fine. Now you've compressed mTOR even more. And if you had coffee that morning, you compressed it even more. Then after you exercise, you eat protein. Now, all of a sudden, when you eat protein, the mTOR is going to spike right when the body is ready to use it. And this allows you to have incredible results from your exercise. You didn't have to exercise very much. You got to enjoy coffee and you weren't hungry because you did an intermittent fast, which is something that gives you more energy, not more hunger. And the end result of that is that we can live our lives without cancer, without diabetes, but with regeneration of our cells, because we have high levels of regeneration, then high levels of repair. High levels of regeneration, high levels of repair. And by cycling mTOR, what I call in my book, it's tripling down on mTOR by using all three techniques to keep it low and then to cause it to spike. That seems to be the recipe for living a long time.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, and particularly those, weekend warriors, endurance athletes, folks like myself who love running marathons or cycling. The trap that we fall into is this idea that we just need to consume fuel all the time, realizing that we have so much stored fuel and energy in our body for precisely those reasons. Yeah.
It's really interesting. And you mentioned Dean Ornish before, who is one of the most outspoken of the still living anti-fat doctors out there who eat carbohydrates all the time and run all the time. It has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you cannot exercise away a bad diet. 80 to 90% of how you look and your metabolism is caused by what you eat and when. It is not caused by exercising away potato chips and pizza. You just can't do it. And it's unfortunate that you just can't do it, but that's how it is. So you've got to choose the right foods and then enough movement. And that seems to be the right recipe. The entire anti-aging community that I'm aware of is very much on the eat a substantial amount of the right fats, not on a low-fat diet. The low-fat diet seemed to not work very well when it was popular in the 80s and 90s. In fact, it's one of the things that's led to the diabetic situation that we find the world in today.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to start taking some questions. And the first one I'm going to take is an interesting one because I've heard you speak about it before, but let the viewers hear too. What are your thoughts on veganism? Do you think it significantly increases life expectancy? This is a question by JP.
I have written a very well-researched book on fertility, and I have been very deep in the science for a very long time. I was a dedicated raw vegan and a non-raw vegan for a substantial period of time. Veganism is bad for humans, and it is bad for the environment. It is not sustainable for humans, especially over multiple generations. Now, vegetarianism, you can be healthy as a vegetarian because you're allowed to have ghee. I've spoken at the largest vegan conference and explained the science behind this. And when I came back the next year, 2/3 of the audience had added ghee and was feeling better. So no, you cannot get good fat from plants. We are made out of animal fats and plants are made out of plant fats. When you eat fat, it goes into two different things. It goes into building blocks for your cells, the membranes of your cells and your mitochondria, and it goes into energy production. If you're only eating plant oils, you do not have adequate building blocks for healthy cells. You can do it if you're having butter. You can do it if you're having cheese. You can do it if you're having other animal-derived fats. Unfortunately, the vegan diet just doesn't work. And environmentally, I live on a small farm and we have sheep. Where the sheep get to go and poop, we have abundant vegetables and a healthy ecosystem. If we all eat corn and soy, which is the direction of where a vegan diet would end up, we end up just taking from the earth and never putting back in the earth. And we will destroy the 60 years of topsoil we have left. We must return free ranging animals to our agriculture so we can have enough soil to pull carbon out of the air. And that requires us to at least be vegetarian. I would love to tell you a gravel-based diet would work. We also have to stop industrial farming of animals right now because it's cruel, because it's bad for humans to eat industrially raised animals. So we need animals that eat grass, who are building soil, and we need to at least have butter from those animals because those fats are the precious fats that make up 45% of your brain and various other things throughout your body. You just will not thrive. And a vegan diet, and I have many studies to support this in my book on that, a vegan diet, especially during your fertile years, during pregnancy, will deplete things that are necessary for having healthy kids. So sorry, the vegan diet is not going to work. And the people who do it experience low testosterone in both men and women. You feel great for the first couple months as your thyroid hormone goes up in response to stress caused by having the wrong fats. And then you're convinced, like I was, that the vegan diet makes you feel really good. It must be what works. And then you start the long, slow decline of losing hair, cold sensitivity, autoimmune issues. And the reality is plants don't want us to eat them. They're full of compounds that are hard to digest. So some plants are much better for you than others. And I'll tell you right now, don't eat kale. It's not good for you. There's lots of science behind that as well.
I'm glad you raised testosterone. This is something that comes up a lot in folks who are athletes and people that I coach as well. And I think there's an age around 40 when the male testosterone levels really start to decline. And people don't talk about this enough in terms of testing their levels and the effect it has on your performance, just your sense of well-being, vigor, vitality, all of those things. Share your thoughts on this, please, Dave.
Testosterone got a bad name because in the 1970s, bodybuilders were using not testosterone, but testosterone-like drugs, and we're getting all sorts of bad effects from this. So we thought, testosterone, bad for you, or testosterone makes men act like jerks or something. No. I had less testosterone than my mother when I was 26 because I was obese and I had metabolic problems, and I got to measure it. And when I went on testosterone to bring my levels up to where they were supposed to be, magically, it's not about sex. It's about your brain. In both men and women, we need different levels. Testosterone is a hormone that gives you a zest for life. It makes you happy with your relationship. It makes you happy with your job. It makes you passionate about the world around you. And a side effect of having adequate testosterone as we age is that you don't get dad bod. You don't get love handles. You actually stay leaner, whether you're a man or a woman, but it's more, I care about the world around me. And when you're low on testosterone, it's tied to anxiety, depression, low metabolic function, and just unhappiness. So I consider it mission critical that we look at andropause in men, which is kind of like menopause in women. And we say, all right, what are your testosterone levels? You should have the testosterone levels of a 30 or a 35-year-old when you're 105, and you will really like your life. And I've cited dozens of studies showing that it's either life extending or life enhancing in my anti-aging book.
Great. Thank you. A question from Amit Mukim. Dave, I've been doing IF for many years, following Ayurveda and traditional Indian medicine as well. I would love to hear, if it's possible, how the impact of mindfulness and plant medicine in possibly accelerating the impacts and effects of intermittent fasting. Thank you, Amit, for that question.
It's such a beautiful question because mindfulness alone can cause many of the changes we're talking about with diet. And it's interesting, you mentioned Dr. Ornish earlier. The studies that he references around the extreme low-fat diet that he's popularized, all of them involve mindfulness and the diet. And the changes that were caused by the diet he recommends are the same changes you get from mindfulness, whether or not you eat that diet. So mindfulness apart from food makes a huge difference. And mindfulness around fasting is a really profound thing because something happens when our stomach is empty. These mitochondria we talked about earlier, they are sensors. And when there's no food in your stomach, they actually turn up their sensitivity to the environment. And as the person who asked the question probably has noticed, because he has a longer experience with intermittent fasting, if you're fasted and you go for a walk in nature, it's a different experience than if you go for a walk on a full stomach because the sensors in your body, the very subtle ones, are turned outwards. And if you're meditating like I have in Nepal at a monastery, and you actually have an empty stomach, your meditation will be richer. In part, it's because you have ketones in the brain, which allowed the neurons to have more electricity. But it's also in part because the sensors in your body were looking outwards because instead of just working on chewing up whatever you had and digesting it, all the energy that went into digestion is now available for awareness. So combining fasting with meditation is a very, very important thing. And it's funny, we figured this out before we understood the biochemistry behind it. And probably the richest history of this that there is comes out of Ayurveda. So I would say, ask your grandparents what they would do in India, and you're probably on the right track as a biohacker.
Yeah. I want to thank everyone for all their questions. There's so many. I'm going to club a few now quickly because we're running out of time. Lots of questions from people who are either very young, 18, 30-year-olds to 69, 70-year-olds, all asking about when's the right time for me to start, which I'm guessing can be any time. And if so, if they're really young or if they're at the slightly older spectrum, what are the top one or two things that they must do to get the most impact?
The best time to start is 3 months before you're conceived. Now, we don't get much choice about that now, but if you are of childbearing age and you start applying these techniques before and during pregnancy, you have the highest leverage ever. You can actually program your babies to be stronger and more resilient. That was the topic of my very first book, and it's what I did for my own kids. You have a much higher return on investment if you start when you're 16 or 18 or 20 than you do when you're 80. However, I have had board members of the nonprofit anti-aging group I run who are, in fact, my friend Mike, 88 years old. And he'd call me at midnight full of energy going, hey, I have this new idea. So I have seen people in their 80s reverse their age. I've seen people in their 70s do it. And the most important thing you could possibly do is stop eating when the sun goes down and go for a period of time every day with your stomach empty. So it doesn't have to be a long fast. You can go 12 hours. I mean, don't eat after dinner, sleep for 8 hours, and then wait a couple hours to eat in the morning. You did a short intermittent fast. That alone, and just saying, okay, it's dark, I don't eat. If you did that and nothing else, maybe go for a walk every day, you're going to actually transform things. And if you went for a walk every day, but you shifted the meal and you just ate, at 10 o'clock at night every night, you're probably going to get diabetes. And I would also tell you, start using ghee instead of whatever liquidy seed oils that American companies have tried to force on you. Those are not healthy for you. That is marketing. It is not science.
Dave, thank you very much. So many more questions. And to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, perhaps I should ask you, where can they find out more of not only where they can get your book from, but other resources that they can get more knowledge and wisdom from you?
Absolutely. If you go to daveasprey.com, there's 3,000 articles I've written. They're all free. I'm teaching all of my books and advanced courses at something called the Upgrade Collective. You go to ourupgradecollective.com. So there's a rich community of people doing this. And we're pushing almost 1,000 episodes of Bulletproof Radio, which has had about 200 million downloads. It's a podcast you can listen to. And my book, Fastest Way, is available pretty much wherever you like to buy books. And I talk about fasting in a cave for 4 days in the book. It is a book that is half the spiritual and awareness and mindfulness side, and it's half the biology side because they go together.
David, it's been incredible to have you. As I said, I was so looking forward to this, and you've certainly lived up to that. Thank you for all the wisdom. Thank you for being with us on TEDx Gateway. I wish you very well and look forward to following you on all the work that you're doing from here on in as well.
Thank you, Dr. Rainey.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for today's session. We will see you on the next edition of The World Has Changed next week, the 16th of April, where Shweta Chakrabarti talks about how to prepare for the next pandemic. We then have Ramesh Srinivasan on the 19th of April, and we have Ethan Cross, who I'll be joining again on the 23rd of April. You can all sign up for future webinars on TEDxGateway.com. On Friday, the 30th of April, we also have Mr. Dash, Srikantkar Dash. I call him Dash. I've known him for many years. I can never pronounce his first name properly, but he goes by Dash. And then on May the 7th, we've got Robert Metcalf, Lessons from 50 years of internet connectivity. Lots of great themes coming up, as always, on TEDx Gateway. Thank you very much for being with us. I've been Doc M. I'm your champion of well-being. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.